Still not the Scotia Arena.
If it's not that one, then you're talking about 60,000.
Yes.
You're talking 360,000 seats. Oh my God. I thought it was
You better do your fact checking.
I know.
Good morning.
I still like CNN now.
Yeah.
$5 a ticket, that's a lot of money.
Morning and morning.
Okay.
Morning. All right.
All right. So we're ready.
No, Rogers Center.
So
At least 50,000.
So
Let's call it 50,000.
I think the 60,000 squeezed in.
They were like, I was ready to start. Wow.
Yeah, there's no, I'm really not interested in Taylor Swift.
Hopefully she'll leave the States now that the.
That's what they were just saying.
No, no.
She's going to Italy. Apparently.
You should.
So yesterday, what we were talking about is when can we use circumstantial evidence in order to award someone compensation, and when can we not? Everyone remember that discussion? So in the course of that discussion, we brought in a few cases from the Gemara, and it seemed like there were some times that you could, and there were some times that you can't. The Maharik, who's an early Acharon, gives us a sort of a criterion of when we do and when we don't rely on circumstantial evidence. If it's to determine what actually took place, like the case of the dead animal that's on the side of the wild camel, right? So then we don't rely on umdina. We can't rely on circumstantial evidence. But if we know what happened, but we just don't know what the person's intention was when entering into that contract, so then we're allowed to infer what we think a person's thinking was. However, as Rav Sharaga correctly pointed out, that distinction doesn't always hold true for other cases in the Gemara. The case of Chasa, where he what was the case over there again?
The great one.
Right. No. That was Rabbi Bena'ah. Let's see.
Was also the one about with the husband.
That was the case of a guy named Chasa who was so poor he couldn't have possibly owned the silver goblet. Yeah. So, right. So at the end of the day, Asher Al-Kain, Rav Sharaga says, we don't really have a good distinction between when we do rely on circumstantial evidence and when we don't, because the Maharik's distinction doesn't hold true for all the cases in the Gemara. However, and so that he sort of leaves that on the side. He says, that notwithstanding, in the case of where a bunch of people got sick in the hotel, he says, Kaven she'ein raya berur shehacholi shekibel hatoveya kara machmas achilas ochel malon. It's not absolutely certain that the reason why the guy got sick, since we don't have any lab samples, was a product of the hotel, and certainly because not all the hotel guests got sick, it could be that it's not the hotel's fault, and it could be that he got sick some other way. And therefore, you cannot, by the letter of the law, hold the hotel liable. But in this case, as he points out, as usually will take place, a hotel doesn't want to get the bad rap. They don't want to get poorly rated on Yelp or Google ratings or whatever it is. And they want the guests to be happy. So they came to a compromise that they would give this guy and his family a free weekend at the hotel. Okay, v'ha'emes v'hashalom ehavu, and everyone was moichel. As the pasuk says, you're supposed to love truth and peace. Fine. So just the footnote, as far as the question is, how could Rabbi Bena'ah, in his case, he basically said that the mother was overheard saying that 9 out of my 10 sons are from other men. And so the question was, which one is which? So Chassa said, everyone go bang on the father's kever, and one son refused. So Rabbi Bana said that's the real son. So that's you're trying to establish fact based upon behavior. That's circumstantial evidence. So
How would the son know that he's a real son?
So he doesn't, but there's a certain, I guess maybe a certain child instinct. This is I don't know. That's really, none of the children know. But yeah, it's like an instinct, you know.
Cut the baby in half.
Baby in half.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Well,
But it's not how you gonna know yet.
but that's
This is
but
different.
but they're the mother. The two women knew who was the real mother, right?
Right.
Here, what Hal is asking is, none of the sons know who's
Oh, I see.
the daddy's baby, right?
Just lazy.
Right, and who's the mama's maybe, yeah. L'chora nira lomer b'pshitus al pi ma shekasav sham harashbam shekavanas ha'av hayta sheyitnu et ha'yerusha leben sheyivaru based in ayin sham. He says one way to answer that question of why Rabbi Bana felt that was a good criterion is when the father was on his deathbed, he said, give the money to whichever son based in is able to determine is the son. Velochein kevin shekach tziva ha'av, and since that was the father's dying wish, lo shayach kan haklal de'ein darim al pi umdina. He basically implicitly is saying, I'd like you to use whatever criteria you can to come up with some kind of determination who my son is. So that would be one way of answering that question. V'yesh lahosif al pi ma shekasav ha'marik shehevi ha'rabbeinu hagon ha'machaber shlita dim ha'umdana hi ladas umdan das ha'nosein v'lo ha'metzias azlinan basrei. That if you're thinking about what, according to the Maharik, you are allowed to use umdana to determine what a person is thinking. So when the guy's on his deathbed, and we know that he wants all of his estate to go to his real son, then you try to estimate, like, how does he want us to determine that? And if you can say that what he really meant was, since there were no DNA tests back then, right? Obviously, today we'd be able to establish with absolute clarity by having each one of the sons take a DNA test. But back then you couldn't. So therefore, it was implicit in the father's instructions, use whatever estimations you can to make this determination. Imkain hachanami Rabbi Bana asa umdana ladas mahaita da'at ha'av lachach samach al ha'umdana hazu. And therefore, you could easily answer the question of Rabbi Bana''s case that he did rely on circumstantial evidence because he assumed correctly that was his wish. Okay. All right. So we don't have a really good, I mean, this is worth pursuing a little bit more, maybe for a sugya shir. When do we rely on circumstantial evidence in halacha and when do we not? I gave a shir maybe 30 years ago on this topic, so I don't remember what I said back then, but it's definitely worthwhile pursuing a little bit further. I probably have notes, handwritten notes, from 30 years ago.
Maybe a cassette.
Which you kept.
Fine.
I have notebooks in my house, yeah.
You could find a cassette recording.
Yeah,
Can we find a player?
That's a good question.
yeah.
I have one.
Wow, that makes you special.
If anyone needs their cassettes played, Dale's room.
That's a reason to make money, huh?
Okay. All right. So why don't we go on to the next tshuva? Gidul behema daka be'eretz Yisrael. So there is a halacha that it is prohibited to raise small farm animals in Eretz Yisrael. When we say small farm animals, there are two categories of farm animals in halacha. There's behema gasa and behema daka. What's an example? A gas is a large. A cow is a large farm animal. A camel is a large farm animal. A horse, a donkey. What's a behema daka? Goats, sheep, lamb, right, etc. Those are what's called behema daka. Now, why is that distinction made in halacha? First of all, you should know this from your tefillin, right? Did you ever hear the question, are your tefillin gasos?
Yeah.
Okay, so what does that mean? They're made from the leather of a large animal, which means they're cow leather and not sheep leather, sheepskin. And why is that relevant? Because sheepskin, which is many times what we use for cloth of a Sefer Torah, is very thin in comparison to cowhide. And it's not as sturdy of an encasement for your tefillin. So in the old days,
The outside.
yeah.
cloth?
No, the outside, the boxes. The
Do
boxes
they make them out of sheepskin?
the boxes used to be made out of sheepskin before we had the hydraulic technology. It was very uncommon to make them out of
'Cause they
cowhide
couldn't bend them and.
because it was harder to bend them if you didn't have the proper tools. That's right. Now that we have more advanced technology in the last century or so, we've been using Behemagasa leather, and so it makes for sturdier tefillin. I mean, we have the best tefillin. That your tefillin, I guarantee you, is of a much higher quality than your grandfather's was. And the further back you go in history, the less the quality, presumably. I mean, I'm sure there could have been periods in Jewish history where they were really what's the word I'm looking for? Artisans and stuff like that. But perhaps the attention to detail back in the day might have been a little better. I don't know. But anyway,
The actual ksav?
the actual ksav, I don't know. I think that even today the ksav is even superior, but that's not.
So
That's not necessary.
point back, just, that means you'd have to change your tone, always fix your boxes all the time, like every couple of years, because I have never changed.
Yeah. So there's a tshuva from the Chassam Sofer, because already in his time, like in the 19th century, gasos were becoming more and more popular, and he was of the opinion that you don't have to ever check your tefillin if they're gasos, because they're really sealed tight, they're protected from the elements, and you don't have to worry about it.
I go take an old. So I'd be surprised if you'll take them at night if I don't take them.
Yeah, all of our tefillin today is with hydro.
Even if you're using the same from your head when you got the mitzvah.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
am.
I was just saying. It's
I
not
would
the
I would say
same.
the chance of not having been.
And I had to say, guys say it's everything.
Yeah.
If somebody not mock me about keeping their tefillin in a temperature controlled sort of environment all the time, and they don't leave it in their car in summer or winter. I mean, if you leave your car in summer or winter, cannot crack or things happen.
Yeah, that's a terrible thing to do.
Same happens, I'm sure, but some people do.
You bring your tefillin in every day.
Every day.
Sure.
I think most people do, because everyone understands that you leave your tefillin out in the cold or out in the heat, it destroys them.
I know if everybody understands.
Yeah, maybe not. Okay.
Most people.
Just look at the
So-
sidewalks and how they expand.
So I was just bringing the tefillin in as an illustration of where we know that there's a distinction between Gasa and Daka for our tefillin, but there's also a distinction in halacha as far as if you're a farmer, what animals are you allowed to raise in Eretz Yisrael? And the Gemara says that it's usher to raise a behema Daka in Eretz Yisrael. What do you think the reason for that is?
You think it'd be the other
Daka's
way
a
than-
small one, right?
Small
I
ones,
think it'd be the opposite.
Steal other people's grass.
because they steal other people's property. Yeah, because invariably when you're a shepherd, you let your animals graze on other people's land. They eat up the grass, they eat up the vegetation, and there's invariably too much theft that takes place.
Whole thing with load and upper.
Yeah, it could be.
You mean the animal eating someone else's food is the theft you're talking about?
Yeah,
Yes.
from someone else's property.
There is a difference in the way that a bovine eats the grass compared to a sheep. A bovine will cut the grass, whereas a sheep will actually pull it out.
But that's all they raise.
That's another good reason.
So,
That's interesting. I didn't know that. But I don't know if that's the reason. I had thought that the reason was because sheep travel, they move around.
I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Whereas cows usually stay in, relatively speaking, cows
But
stay
in
in one.
Eretz Yisrael, you don't see cows, only in the north.
Yeah,
No, but
That's what I
that's,
was
they're
thinking.
only milk cows. Like,
Yeah.
they don't-
Right, but for grazing, for meat, they only use. meat
But there's
that go on.
lots of.
A lot of people-
daca.
a lot of people have sheep in Israel.
Yeah.
Sheep, they're everywhere.
Yeah, and goats.
And
Yeah.
goats and.
So the
chicken.
question is,
Would chicken be one?
no, chicken is not,
It's not a behemoth.
it's not a behemoth. Yeah.
Oh,
I was gonna say, if you can't have chickens, how do they have eggs?
Yeah, chickens are fine.
import them.
Right,
Chickens are
That's what
fine.
we're talking about.
So the question is, how do we apply this halacha, especially when we know that there are plenty of goats and sheep in Eretz Yisrael today?
Right.
Okay, so yesh lanu gina v'hayeladim rotzim legadel eiz bagina v'hashchenim mitnagdim. Ha'im zchutam lihitnaged. So we have a garden, and the kids want to bring a goat into the garden so that they can raise a goat in the garden. The neighbors are opposed. If you were a neighbor, would you want to have a goat in your neighbor's backyard?
If my
That
neighbor
would- that would
wanted to
get
keep
my
a-
goat,
If,
wouldn't it?
if a neighbor wanted to keep a goat in their backyard.
Yeah, but they would eat your azaleas and stuff, you know. Haim zuchutam lihitnaged. Do they have a right to protest? Okay, so Hagemara bebava kama hevia masa bechased echad shahaya goneach milibo. That there was a person who had some kind of medical condition that he was having moaning from the heart. I'm not sure. I think that's what it means. Va'amru harofim shehu tzarich linak chalav roteach mishacharit l'shacharit l'rafot oto. And the doctors basically said that he has to suckle hot milk from a goat's udder for 24 hours in order to heal him. That I've never heard of that remedy.
Where's Joby when you need him?
Yeah, I don't think that's
Turn around 3 times.
Yeah,
Stand on your head and
I
say,
don't think that's a known remedy
Yeah.
today.
24 hours sucking on a goat.
Veheviu lo ezechat v'kashru lo b'raglei hamita. Hey, listen, I'm sure someone does that in New Zealand. Yeah, all right.
That's why.
names.
I'm not going I'm sure how they act. I'm gonna ask how they act out of public.
Yeah, okay, right. All right, so they brought him a goat. They tied it to the bedpost. Liyamim nichnusu chaverav levakros. Sometime later, his friends came to visit him. Gaven sharo et ha'ez chazru lachoreim. When his friends saw that he had a goat in his bedroom, they turned around to leave. And they said, Amru listim mizuyan beveso shel zeh v'anu nichnasim levakro. They said they were indignant. They said, there's an armed robber in this man's house, and we're going to come in and visit him. They were referring to the goat. Yeah, they called the goat an armed robber because the goat, typically what goats do is that they'll eat other people's property, and if you try to stop them, you could get gored by the goat. V'lachein pasak maran b'shulchan aruch. And that's why the Shulchan Aruch paskins, Ein megadlim behema daka be'eretz Yisrael. You're not allowed to raise small farm animals in Eretz Yisrael. Mipnei shedarkam lirot bisadot zarim vehezekam matzoi, because they typically graze, excuse me, in other people's fields, and their damage is prevalent. Ulam himshich maran hashulchan aruch sham v'kasav de bizman hazeh she'ein matzoi sheyusados liYisrael be'eretz Yisrael nireh shemutar. But he says nowadays, where most property in Israel is not owned by Jews, it would seem that it's okay. So it's a little bit strange why Azal abandoned that takana just because most property is, maybe they felt that most property is just hefker in Eretz Yisrael at the time of this writing. Okay, let's see. Amnam zehaya bizman maran, but that was in the 16th century, in the times of Rabbi Yosef Cairo. V'nechluku haposkim mahadin bizmanenu she'eretz Yisrael biyad haYehudim v'holechet u'mityashevet. So the poskim disagree as to what the halacha would be today, that Eretz Yisrael is filled with Jews, and it keeps expanding. Ha'im chozer hadavar li isuro. Does it now become usher? Hagona Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank Zatzal, Hayadato she lahatir. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in Hart Tzvi, he felt that it was okay to have goats and sheep in your house. Kevin shebemeshech hazman shelo haya yishuv Yisrael hutar legadel behema daka. Shuv ein nesar hadavar shuv ein hadavar nesar rak al yedei minyan chadash. He says, because since for centuries it was permissible to have these animals graze on no man's land in Eretz Yisrael, it's therefore no longer prohibited. You would need a new takana in order to prohibit it again. And we don't make new gezeras nowadays. And therefore, like the original heter that was extant for centuries when Eretz Yisrael was sparsely populated, still applies. Ulam b'shut yabia oimer chalak alav. But Rav Avadia disagreed with him. V'dacha et rayato mishviyas v'hela lasar af bizman hazeh keven shahayishavu shel Yisrael. Rav Avadia said that doesn't apply, that the old takana
So
goes.
it goes a takana, not a halacha? I'm not clear.
Yeah, well, a takana is a halacha. It's a rabbinic
When
halacha.
when did that?
That's a good question. What's the history? What is the history? I will have to look that up. It goes back to the Gemara. Let me just see.
Or the Gemara, so it's not the time of the Gemara.
Let me just, I'll tell you how, I think it's a direct quote. Second. It's a Mishnah in Bava Kama. Let's see here. Ein Megadlin behemadaka be'eretz Yisrael, aval Megadlin besurya uvemidbaros she be'eretz Yisrael. Okay, just give me 1 second. It's a Mishnah in Bava Kama. Ein Megadlin behemadaka be'eretz Yisrael, aval Megadlin besurya uvemidbaros she be'eretz Yisrael. You're not allowed to raise small farm animals in Eretz Yisrael, but you are allowed to in Syria and in deserts that are in Eretz Yisrael that are not populated areas. Ein megadlin tarnagolim b'Yerushalayim mipnei hakadshim. You're not allowed to. So let's just see. Let's see how the Bartanura understands this. Let's see. Hold on.
Crazy too. Something awesome.
Oh yeah.
That you can click on that and it brings you to the source. That's the.
Yeah. And so the reason Ein Megadlin Behemadaka Eretz Yisrael is Mishum Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, because you want to settle Eretz Yisrael properly, and goats destroy the seeds. That's how the Bartanura explains it. Aval Megadlin Besuria, but you are allowed to raise them in Syria, which is Artzos.
It's not in Syria, it's not in Eretz Yisrael, it's not in the.
He says, well, they did have Kedusha. King David expanded the borders of Eretz Yisrael into Syria. The Lav Shmei Kibush, V'lo Chashin and Bali Yishuv. It's not therefore officially part of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it's okay. V'im yafsidu sados acherim yishalomena. And if you cause damage to other people's fields, you can always compensate them afterwards. So the Bartanura doesn't mention the idea of thievery, but the Rambam does. The Rambam says mipnei sheposhtim lasados is because they invade other people's fields. They go into lifshot, to stick out your hand. So what else did we see? Ein Megadlin tarnagolim b'Yerushalayim. You're not allowed to raise chickens in Jerusalem. Ibnei Kodshim she'ochlim sham the derech tarnagolim lenakir ba'ash, but because chickens peck into garbage heaps. The shema yaviu etzem kisaora min hasheretz v'yatamu es hakodshim. And we're worried that through their pecking and their walking around, they may contaminate a holy item that you may have in your house. Because they may have in their mouth, let's say, a piece of a sheretz that they picked up in the garbage, and they'll then peck your food and contaminate it. Okay, and so what else did the Mishnah say?
So it says chickens only in Jerusalem, that's the same issue.
Right, only Jerusalem. Velo Kohanim be'eretz Yisrael mipnei hataharas, and all Kohanim in general may not have it anywhere in Eretz Yisrael because of taharas, because of holy foods. Shah Kohanim ochlim truma l'tzrichim l'shomer b'tahara, because Kohanim even in Haifa will have truma that they have to maintain holiness.
There won't be a chicken raiser.
I won't. I
You don't
can't.
have a chicken
Won't be
coop.
raising chicken. So
Yeah.
When they're talking about Jerusalem,
I'm not so worried about
they're
that.
talking about the walled city, right?
Yeah, usually that's what it's talking about. Why, you want to get a goat?
No,
You wanna get a chicken?
Chickens across the street.
He wants to
Yeah,
get chicken.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all of this only applies when there's a temple, right?
Oh,
Because there's no kachim right now.
oh.
Okay. Ein magadlin chazirim b'chol makom. You're not allowed to raise pigs in any place, even in Chutz La'aretz. And what's the reason? It says mefarish taima b'gemara. The Gemara explains kishitzaru malchi chashmonoi zeh al zeh hayu regilim b'chol yom shahayu elu shebachutz malam lahem tamidim laelu shebifnim. So there was warring factions of the Hasmoneans, and they would foist over an animal so that they could bring the daily carbon tamid. But yom echad helu lahem chazir. But one day they foisted up a pig to show their contempt. Kevin shehigia lachatzi choma noatzi part of bechoma v'nizdaza eretz Yisrael arba meos parsa ba'osa shah amru arur hamagadel chazirim. And Eretz Yisrael shook, it trembled because of this outrage.
So today you're not allowed to be involved in, anything with pigs.
You shouldn't be a pig farmer, yeah.
Or even if you're
Big farmer.
you're buying and selling pig,
A pig farmer anywhere. Well, let's say, can you buy stock in futures and
Right,
pork belly?
Right.
Pork belly futures. I don't think that's a problem. There was an article years ago, can a Jew buy stock in McDonald's, right? As long as you don't have a controlling share, then you're allowed to. You're allowed to invest in things that are not kosher. Lo yigadel adam et hakelev ela im ken haya kashur b'shalshelet. You shouldn't have a dog. You shouldn't raise a dog unless it's tied with a chain. And again, that was because dogs were very wild back then and they could cause damage. Ein parsim nishavim liyonim ela im ken hayu rachok min hayishuv shloshim ris. And finally, you should not set out traps for pigeons unless you're 30 ris, which is 4 mills away from where people live. Because if you set up traps and you're right in the middle of the city, invariably you're going to be catching other people's pigeons and you'll be stealing. So these are all things that have to do with restrictions in halacha about what kind of animals you're allowed to have and what, treatment of animals. So that's the whole theme of this Mishnah. Okay, so
The people have pigeons.
Someone just thinking about buying stock. So what about, it'd be a little different if I wanted to buy Starbucks stock because the majority shareholder is a Jew and they're open on Shabbos?
I don't think that's a problem. First of all, it's a Jew. Yeah,
Howard Schultz.
yeah, but
It's not more than 50%.
he has a controlling share, but it's a publicly traded company. It's okay for you. You don't have a control at all about what the company does.
He does.
He does, but that's got nothing to do with you. In other
He's
words,
choosing to open on Shabbos.
he's choosing to let stores open. They do
And
work
serve
on
treif.
Shabbos and they serve treif and all of that. So the Aveira is on him. It's got nothing to do with you, though. You're investing in a company to make money. And since you don't have a controlling portion, what ends up happening in the company is not is not traceable back to you. Now, you may feel on a moral or ethical grounds, there are plenty of other things that I can invest in, so I'll choose not to invest in Starbucks. But that's meta halachic. That's not halachic. Okay. We'll have to hold it here for today. We'll continue this in Mirz Hashem next week.
So
Everyone
Rabbi-
have an amazing Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.
So Rabbi, we read in the Pasha about the children of Israel coming out of Egypt and giving offerings of sheep and cattle and all sorts of different animals. So, and then they wanted to stay on the side of the Jordan rather than go to Israel for their farming. Is that sort of where this is coming from? That they didn't take the animals?
No, it's not related at all to that story. It's not related at all to that story. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Take care.